I came across an article on the website of Euronews and it says Turkey's Erdogan offers to host Ukraine-Russia peace talks. Now, of course, there have been peace talks before between Russia and Ukraine. This was a few weeks after the Russian special military operation started. Reportedly, these negotiations were very, very successful. Ukraine was ready to sign a peace agreement with Russia. Until the West stepped in, they sent Boris Johnson, who told Zelensky, "Don't sign the agreement, and don't worry, we are going to support you. We are going to send you weapons, and we are going to defeat Russia." So we could have had peace right there and then, but instead, hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost, many more have been injured, the country of Ukraine is in ruins, and also internationally the repercussions of the war are being felt, and many economies across the world have taken a huge hit. So I think it's fair to say that, maybe with the exception of the military-industrial complex, everyone wants this war to stop. But still, the Western propaganda machine is working overtime to feed us this anti-Russian warmongering rhetoric, as if the only possible solution to this conflict is Russia being completely annihilated and Vladimir Putin being behind bars. I believe it's high time that we start facing reality. And the reality is, first of all, that the collective West has been sending tens of billions of dollars and euros to Ukraine in the form of military aid, much of which is unaccounted for, by the way. Also, the West has been sanctioning Russia over and over and over again. The result? Russia is still winning this war because the Russian military is far superior and is getting stronger and stronger, and the Russian economy seems to be doing better than ever. All these Western sanctions seem to have backfired on the US and especially on the European economies. Now, there are some, I'd call them stupid, desperate, irresponsible, warmongering Western leaders like French President Emmanuel Macron, who have even hinted at the possibilities of sending European troops into Ukraine. Now, first of all, as mentioned, the Russian military is far superior, so you'd be sending these troops to their death. But more importantly, Vladimir Putin has said that if NATO countries get involved, it could lead to a nuclear war. Now, even when it comes to nuclear weapons, Russia has the upper hand. Not that it would matter, because if this war goes nuclear, everyone on this planet would be dead. So I think we might have to conclude, as we've been warned before all of this started, that the collective West cannot defeat Russia. But even if they could, do we really want to spend even more of our tax dollars or euros or whatever currency is relevant for your country and send even more weapons to Ukraine and let this war drag on until all Ukrainians are dead? Is that really what we want? I think it's about time that we start realizing that the only way we can end this war is by negotiating. And that means communication. And however difficult it might seem, it's going to take a lot of pride swallowing, but it also means that the collective West, and especially the United States government, is going to have to listen to what Vladimir Putin has to say. So what does Russia want? What demands might they have? Well, we're gonna have to speculate a little bit here, but I think we might have a pretty good idea of what Russia might want. So first and foremost, of course, there's the issue of NATO expansion, especially into Ukraine. Russia wants Ukraine to stay neutral. Then there is the issue of Crimea and also the 4 eastern Ukrainian regions that Russia annexed. Zelensky has demanded that Russia should give them all back. And then there is the matter of denazification. I believe that these are the demands Russia has. They probably have some more demands, but I believe these might be some of the most important ones. Now let's swallow our pride for a moment and let's realistically and objectively look at these potential demands. Given the reality of the situation, given the history of the conflict, the behavior of NATO, the cultural intricacies, given the leverage Russia still has over Europe in terms of energy supply and the influence it has on the world energy supply, and especially also given the dominance that the Russian forces have in Ukraine, let's ask ourselves, are these demands really that unreasonable and really that insurmountable? And also again, is it really worth risking World War III over? Well, let's quickly dive into these issues a little bit. So first of all, NATO expansion. Now I think we first have to realize that NATO was founded upon the philosophy that Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, needed to be kept in check. So this means that already baked into the DNA of NATO is a hostile attitude towards Russia. Now add to that the actual behavior that NATO has displayed over the years. Is it any wonder that Russia considers NATO a huge threat? I mean, against earlier promises made by Western leaders, NATO has been expanding like crazy over the last decades, creeping ever closer to Russia, and with that, of course, also increasing the threat. Now, apparently, Ukraine in many ways is of such strategic importance that Russia feels it cannot afford to let Ukraine become part of NATO because it would mean an existential threat to Russia. Vladimir Putin has been very clear about this. He has been expressing Russian concerns about this many times, and he has been warning the West for over 30 years that Ukraine is an absolute red line for Russia. So the US, NATO, the EU, they all knew very well that if they started messing with Ukraine, that Russia would respond. So my question is, why? Why has the West so desperately been trying to pull Ukraine into NATO, knowing full well that that would provoke a war with Russia? And that is exactly what happened. Now, some of us still might not necessarily agree with the decision made by Putin to invade Ukraine, but you know what? Our personal opinions are actually a bit irrelevant here. The reality of the situation is that Russia did invade Ukraine, and by doing so, it's letting the West know that it is not going to allow Ukraine to become part of NATO. So what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? Well, we could start World War III and hope for the best. You think it's really worth it? Wouldn't it be better if the US president would just pick up the phone, call Putin and said, let's talk about this, realistically? Wouldn't that be better? By the way, here's a crazy thought. Is it really such a crazy idea that we would agree to let Ukraine stay neutral? I mean, if it's a question of ensuring the security of Ukraine, which is usually put forward as the main argument, there are other ways to achieving that than to simply make it part of NATO. Think about that. And then Crimea. Now, for those of you that don't know, Crimea used to be part of Russia, and they kind of gave it to Ukraine back when Ukraine and Russia were both part of the Soviet Union, so they were basically one country. Only after the Maidan coup happened and Ukraine started attacking the eastern part of their own country, causing a lot of instability in the region and risking the security of Crimea, that's when Russia said, Crimea is strategically too important to us, so we're gonna take that back now. Thank you. By the way, don't forget that the vast majority of people living in Crimea already were ethnic Russians. They identified as being Russian. Now again, still you might disagree with Russia taking back Crimea. You might think it's illegal and all that, but let's be realistic about it. Russia took back Crimea in 2014, and even back then there was no one in the world that could do anything about that. Do you really think it's realistic to think that Russia is going to give back Crimea to Ukraine? I wouldn't bet on it. We could talk about it though. Now basically the same is true for the 4 Ukrainian regions that Russia annexed, being Donetsk, Kherson, Lugansk, and Zaporizhia. Now, referendums were held in those regions, and the vast majority voted for becoming part of Russia, and Russia annexed those regions. Now, Western politicians and Western media have been citing sham referendums, illegal annexation, but you know what? It really doesn't matter. Russia took them, and that is the reality. And if you ask me, I think that just like with Crimea, it's not very realistic to think that Russia is ever going to give them up again. Now, and then of course there's the matter of denazification. Now, that may be a little bit more complicated issue, but I think it's pretty fair to say that Ukraine definitely has a neo-Nazi problem that has also deeply penetrated the political class in Ukraine. Now, everyone knew this, including the Western politicians and Western media, but since Russia started their military operation into Ukraine, it seems like they're all suffering from some kind of acute collective amnesia. None of them are talking about it, and some even dare to deny the very existence of it, even though they very well know that that's a lie. Now, if you know that there is a problem with neo-Nazis in Ukraine to at least some degree, then who would be against denazification? I mean, who would be against denazification, period? So I think this shouldn't even be part of the negotiations. Everyone should agree with this, right? But anyway, again, I believe that these are some of the most important demands Russia may have. And again, let's ask ourselves, given the situation, are these demands really that unreasonable? And is it really worth risking a nuclear war over that would kill every human being on this planet? Now, let me tell you what I think. Now, we might have all kinds of emotions running through our bodies caused by this war. For example, you might think you hate Vladimir Putin and everything he stands for. You might despise Russia for the decisions it's made and we should get revenge and all of that. Or you might also hate the role that the United States has played. But at the end of the day, all of that doesn't really matter. It's not going to bring us anything good. If we really want to be serious about achieving peace, we have to set aside our emotions for a moment, stop the warmongering, and we have to face the reality of the situation. We have to come to terms with the fact that some things are simply not going to be possible or not going to be possible anymore because Russia is not going anywhere. So we have to face reality and we have to start communicating. The President of the United States needs to pick up the phone, call Vladimir Putin and get this resolved. Because I firmly believe that we are never, ever gonna solve this conflict on the battlefield. The only path that leads to peace is at the negotiating table. Period.